Welcome to my channel, Crimson Inquiry.
It was in the early spring of '89, when the damp fog of London clung so closely to Baker Street that the gas lamps outside shone only as dull orbs in the gloom, that I first heard of the affair which has since been whispered among the more curious mysteries of my friend's career. I had lately returned from a taxing round of patients and found Holmes in his customary seat by the fire. The long, lean figure stretched languidly upon the settee, his eyes half closed yet alive with that peculiar inward brightness which betrayed a mind ceaselessly at work. On the table lay an unopened envelope of unusual thickness, addressed in a hand that trembled with agitation. Holmes's violin rested beside it, as though he had been on the brink of playing when the letter had arrived. "You have been busy today." "Holmes," said I, hanging my hat and coat. "Not so, Watson," he replied, springing upright with sudden animation. "But London has been busy enough for the both of us. Observe this." He pushed the letter toward me. The handwriting betrays haste, but also education. Note the long-tailed Y and the flourished capitals. The paper is of French manufacture, though the ink is of cheap London quality. A man of means, then, who has had occasion to conceal it. Before I could press him further, Mrs. Hudson ushered into the room a gentleman of middle years, tall but stooping, his face pale with distress. His clothing, though well cut, was dishevelled, and his gloved hands twitched as if unable to find rest. "This is Mr. Arkwright," said Holmes, before the man had uttered a word. "Late of Surrey, currently residing in Bloomsbury. The scent of recent rain upon your boots suggests you came directly from Russell Square. Pray be seated." Our visitor stared, his lips parting in astonishment. "You are indeed as remarkable as they say, Mr. Holmes. I hardly know how to begin, for what I have to tell you is most dreadful, and I fear, incredible." Holmes steepled his fingers. "The dreadful and the incredible, Mr. Arkwright, are my daily bread. Proceed." The man swallowed hard, and in a trembling voice related his tale. "2 nights past, as I returned from a business engagement in the city, I encountered upon the Strand a figure so singular that my very blood chilled. He was tall, cloaked heavily against the mist, and his bearing was that of a gentleman. Yet his face—" Here Mr. Arkwright clutched at his throat as though speech itself failed him. His face was no face at all. It was as though a mask of flawless smoothness covered every feature. No eyes, no mouth, nothing but a pale expanse like wax before the sculptor has touched it. He stood motionless, watching me, or so I felt, and then melted into the fog. Watson though I am, physician by training and not prone to superstition, I confess that a shiver ran the length of my spine at this grotesque account. "You are certain, sir, that it was not some grotesque mask?" I asked. "I thought so too," he whispered, "until I saw him again. Last night, from the window of my chambers in Bloomsbury, I spied the same figure standing beneath the gas lamp opposite. He remained there still as a statue for near half an hour, though no mortal could stand so long without shifting. When at last I ventured out, he was gone, and no one in the street admitted to having seen him." Holmes's eyes gleamed with that peculiar fire I knew so well. "A faceless gentleman who appears and disappears with the fog. Curious, most curious. And what is it, Mr. Arkwright, that you fear?" "That he waits for me," the man gasped. "That he will strike, though I know not why. For just this morning upon my doorstep I found a card, blank, save for the impression of a signet seal pressed into the paper, a circle enclosing a cross." Holmes leaned forward, examining the card that Arkwright produced from his pocketbook. His thin lips curved into the faintest of smiles. "Watson," said he softly, "we may have here a matter most singular indeed. The game, I fancy, is already afoot." Mr. Arkwright's hand trembled as he replaced the blank card into his pocketbook, his pallid face glistening faintly in the firelight. For some moments Holmes remained silent, turning the impression over in his mind with that peculiar absorption which rendered him deaf alike to conversation and to time. His long fingers tapped against one another rhythmically. His gaze fixed not upon the man before him, but upon some inner chamber where the pieces of this mystery were already assembling themselves into a larger whole. At last he stirred. "You are acquainted, I presume, with the signet seal impressed upon this card?" Arkwright shook his head. "I swear to you, Mr. Holmes, it is wholly unknown to me. I have never in all my life seen such a device." Holmes raised his brows almost imperceptibly. "Indeed?" Yet it is not so uncommon as you might suppose. Watson, observe closely. The circle enclosing the cross is not merely decorative. The design is proportioned with mathematical precision, suggesting an emblem rather than a personal flourish. A society, perhaps, or some discreet brotherhood that delights in symbols rather more than in candor. The client's agitation increased visibly. If that is so, I am undone, for I have never offended any society that I know of. Holmes's lips curved faintly. That you know of, precisely, and therein lies the thread we must draw upon. He turned suddenly to me. You recall, Watson, the affair of the red circle? There are echoes here, though the matter seems of a darker hue. Note the man's manner of appearing and vanishing, his choice of the fog as his accomplice, and the employment of a blank card, a deliberate piece of theatre designed to unnerve. We are dealing with an adversary who understands psychology as well as concealment. I confess it chills me, said I, unable to restrain my words. A man without a face. Such an apparition might unseat the reason of many a steadier fellow than Mr. Arkwright here. Holmes inclined his head. And yet, Watson, every apparition rests upon something solid. Our task is not to tremble at the figure, but to seek the stage upon which the trick is played. He rose and began to pace the room in those long, restless strides that always presage the rising storm of his intellect. His dressing gown swirled about him as he moved from the window to the hearth, his eyes gleaming in the half-light. Mr. Arkwright, you will oblige me with a precise account of your movements upon the first night you saw this figure. Every hour, every detail, however trivial it may appear. Omit nothing. The man drew a steadying breath. Very well. I had dined with my cousin at the Reform Club, departing at about 9:30. My route home lay by carriage down the Strand. As we proceeded, the horse grew restive, so I instructed the driver to halt that I might walk a portion of the way. It was then, in the midst of the fog, that I perceived the figure. He was standing by the entrance of a narrow alley between two shuttered shops, a little to the east of Charing Cross. I assure you, gentlemen, I should have thought him a beggar, but for the fine cut of his cloak and the polish of his boots which caught the lamplight. Yet when he turned his face, or what should have been his face, toward me, I saw nothing but that dreadful blankness. My heart froze. I hurried on, and when I looked back he had vanished. Holmes, who had stood with head bowed listening intently, now resumed his chair and motioned him to continue. On the second night, I was at home in Bloomsbury, reviewing correspondence. It was near midnight when I glanced from my window and beheld him once more, standing perfectly still across the street. He made no movement, no gesture, merely stood as though waiting. I confess I was too overcome with terror to confront him. When at last I gathered courage to descend, he was gone and the street was empty. Holmes tapped his fingers lightly against his lips. A second observation under very different conditions. Curious indeed. Tell me, do you possess enemies, Mr. Arkwright? Any person with a grievance, be it financial, professional, or personal? The man hesitated. His eyes shifted momentarily before he spoke. None to my knowledge. I live quietly, conduct my business with propriety, and wrong no man. Holmes's keen gaze narrowed. That answer is too readily given. No man of enterprise, and you, sir, are plainly a man of enterprise, lives without stepping upon some other's toes. Consider carefully. Arkwright flushed but shook his head. I cannot think of one. Holmes said no more, though I saw the gleam in his eye which told me he had already marked some inconsistency. Instead, he rose and fetched his violin from its place upon the table. With a few languid strokes of the bow, he produced a low, throbbing note that seemed to vibrate through the very air of the sitting-room. Watson, said he, with that sudden abruptness which always startled me, we must see the scene for ourselves. A faceless gentleman is no more than a trick of shadow until we tread the ground upon which he was sighted. Mr. Arkwright, you will remain at your chambers tonight as usual. Should our friend with the blank visage pay you another visit, take no action but record the hour. Watson and I shall attend the Strand this very evening. Tonight? I exclaimed. Tonight, Holmes repeated firmly. The fog is heavy once again, and it is under such cover that our phantom thrives. The longer we delay, the more time he has to play his hand unchecked. Come, Watson, your revolver, if you please. I anticipate no violence, but it is a wise precaution when shadows take human form. Arkwright rose, still pale but visibly relieved that something decisive was to be done. "I am deeply indebted to you, Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson. I shall remain at Bloomsbury, though I confess the thought chills me." Holmes bowed him out with polite brevity, and once our door had closed, he turned to me with a peculiar smile. "You observed him closely, Watson?" "As best I could. He struck me as a gentleman of some standing, but thoroughly unnerved." "Quite so." "And did you notice the fleck of chalk upon his sleeve?" I started. "Chalk? No, I cannot say I did. Nor did he wish you to. A faint trace, but significant. Combined with his hesitation when I pressed him on enemies, it gives me the outline of a most intriguing puzzle. Ah, Watson, the night promises interest indeed." Within the hour, muffled against the chill, I found myself at Holmes's side as we descended into the misty labyrinth of London. The gas lamps burned dimly, their halos swallowed by the heavy vapour that clung to the cobbles. Cabs rattled intermittently past, their drivers cursing the fog, while from unseen quarters came the sound of distant footsteps and the mournful cry of a newsboy hawking the late edition. Holmes moved swiftly, his long stride unerring, as though the haze were no hindrance to his keen perception. "The alley to the east of Charing Cross," he murmured. "It is there our gentleman of shadows made his debut. Keep your eyes sharp, Watson, and your nerves steady. For though we hunt a man, I fancy his costume is that of a phantom." We reached the spot described by Arkwright, a narrow slit between shuttered shops, its entrance swallowed in darkness. Holmes crouched low, running his long fingers over the damp stones, his lantern throwing a pallid glow across the ground. "Here," he whispered. The trace of a polished heel turned sharply into the alley. Not the shuffle of a vagrant, but the stride of one accustomed to good leather. "And what have we here?" He lifted something small from the ground, holding it up to the light. It was a fragment of pale material, thin and pliable, glistening faintly as the lantern caught it. "Watson," said he softly, "does this appear to you like flesh?" I bent closer, suppressing a shudder. It had the ghastly look of skin, yet when I touched it with my finger it yielded with a rubbery resistance. "Some form of wax or prepared rubber," Holmes concluded. "Our faceless gentleman is, it seems, a craftsman in illusions. And yet why display himself thus unless to terrify? The purpose must be deeper." The fog thickened about us, and from somewhere in its depths a slow, deliberate footfall sounded, echoing against the stone walls of the alley. Holmes straightened, his eyes glittering. "Steady, Watson," he murmured. "Our quarry approaches." The measured sound of that approaching tread seemed to throb unnaturally in the stillness, each step deliberate, as though the unseen figure were perfectly aware of our presence and advanced with sinister intent. The fog pressed upon us like a tangible wall, obscuring all but a dim circle of cobbles revealed by Holmes's lantern. I confess my hand closed instinctively about the revolver in my pocket, while Holmes, calm as ever, leaned slightly forward, his whole frame quivering with concentrated attention. The footsteps drew nearer, then halted abruptly, no more than a few yards distant. Silence followed, thick, suffocating silence in which the very beating of my heart sounded loud to my own ears. Then from the haze a shape emerged. He was tall, cloaked as Arkwright had described, and his bearing that of a gentleman rather than a common rough. But it was the face, or the dreadful absence of one, that froze me to the marrow. A pale oval gleamed faintly where his features should have been, smooth and blank, without the faintest line to suggest eye or mouth. In the lantern's glow it shone with a waxen sheen, ghastly and unreal. Holmes uttered no sound, but his eyes glittered with intense satisfaction. He took one step forward, his voice low but commanding. "Good evening, sir. You choose a curious costume for your nocturnal wanderings. May I inquire your purpose in haunting the Strand in such a guise?" The faceless figure gave no reply. Instead, with a sudden, swift movement, he raised a gloved hand to shield the blank mask from the lantern's beam, then turned sharply into the alley. Holmes sprang after him with astonishing speed, and I followed, my revolver ready. The pursuit was brief but bewildering. The fog closed about us like a curtain, swallowing light and sound. I heard the rapid echo of boots striking stone, then the scrape of leather against brick, as though our quarry had scaled some hidden exit. When at last we burst through to the far end of the alley, the street beyond lay empty, the mist drifting undisturbed save for the fading clatter of a carriage wheel. Holmes halted, his chest rising and falling with exertion, though his eyes shone with a peculiar fire. "Remarkable, Watson." "Quite remarkable. He is no ordinary trickster." He moves with knowledge of every bolt hole and passage. Yet in his haste, he has left us something more valuable than his presence. He held up his hand. Pinched between finger and thumb was a torn fragment of black cloth, snagged upon a splintered crate at the mouth of the alley. The fabric was of the finest weave, too delicate for a mere cloak of disguise. We retraced our steps to the point where the figure had first appeared. Holmes bent once more to examine the ground with the lantern. Here, Watson, the same polished heel as before, but fresher, and there, faintly impressed beside it, a peculiar mark. Observe the narrow tread and the angular heel. Continental manufacture, Parisian if I am not mistaken. Our friend, it seems, favours foreign cobblers. I could not withhold a shudder. But to what end, Holmes? Why such an outlandish disguise? To terrify Mr. Arkwright, certainly. But why him and not another? Holmes straightened, pocketing the fragment of cloth. That, my dear fellow, is precisely the question which must lead us to our answer. Terror, when used as a weapon, conceals some deeper purpose. Mark me, Watson, this is no random masquerade, but a deliberate campaign aimed at our client. Until we discover the motive, the mask will remain impenetrable. We returned to Baker Street in the small hours, the fog still swirling thickly about the hansom that carried us. Holmes remained silent for the greater part of the drive, his long fingers tapping restlessly against his knee, his keen gaze fixed on some invisible pattern that only he perceived. At last, as the lamps of Regent Street gleamed faintly through the vapour, he spoke. You noted his silence, Watson. Not a syllable, not so much as a breath to betray him. That mask is no mere covering. It is a contrivance to render speech impossible, or at least unrecognizable. He dare not risk his voice lest it betray his identity, and yet he allowed us to see him plainly, I ventured. Why not flee at once? Because, my dear fellow, he wished to be seen. Each appearance is carefully staged, designed to instill dread. Mr. Arkwright is meant to know he is pursued, watched, menaced by something unnatural. The mind once unseated is more easily manipulated. We must ask ourselves, what advantage is gained if Arkwright be driven to madness or despair? I had no answer, and Holmes lapsed again into thought until we reached our rooms. There he threw off his cloak, lit his pipe, and seated himself at the desk, spreading before him the fragment of cloth and the rubbery shred we had recovered earlier. For near an hour he worked in silence, examining both specimens under his lens, testing them with acid, even applying flame to the waxen scrap, which melted with an acrid odour that filled the room. At length he sat back with a low chuckle. Watson, our phantom's face is of caoutchouc, delicately moulded and tinted to reflect light evenly, so that it appears featureless in the fog. A clever device and no common masker's trinket. As for the cloth, it is cut from the lining of a garment of quality, one tailored, I suspect, in Savile Row, though with a foreign touch in the stitching. Combine this with the continental boots, and we have the outline of a gentleman of cosmopolitan habits, not some back-alley conjurer. You mean, then, that this is no supernatural apparition, but a man of flesh and blood disguising himself to appear otherwise? Precisely, Watson, and therein lies both the danger and the fascination of the case. The first pale light of dawn had begun to creep through the shutters when Holmes at last rose, stretched, and declared our night's labour concluded. We must visit Mr. Arkwright tomorrow, said he. There are matters in his tale which ring false, and I intend to see whether his nerves or his conscience are responsible. Until then, Watson, sleep if you can, though I suspect your dreams may be haunted by blank faces in the fog. Sleep, I attempted, though my rest was fitful. The ghastly vision of that featureless countenance returned again and again, looming in the darkness, until I started awake in a cold sweat. It was therefore with relief that I accompanied Holmes the following morning to Bloomsbury, where Mr. Arkwright received us in his well-appointed chambers. He looked haggard, as though the night had granted him little respite. You saw him, then? He asked breathlessly. Before we had even seated ourselves, we did. Holmes answered curtly, and we found fragments that betray his trickery. But let us set aside appearances, Mr. Arkwright, and come to substance. There are questions you have yet to answer with candour. Who is it that would profit by your ruin, or by filling your nights with terror? Arkwright coloured and shifted uneasily. I assure you I know of no such person. Holmes's eyes bored into him with relentless scrutiny. Then explain, if you please, the fleck of chalk upon your sleeve, when last you visited us. A man does not acquire such a mark in his bedchamber, but in some place where chalk abounds, say a billiard hall, a lecture room or a mason's lodge. "Which was it, Mr. Arkwright?" The man started, paling visibly. For a moment he seemed on the verge of speech.
I cannot
but
say.
checked himself
It
with
is
an
of no
effort.
consequence.
Holmes's lips curled in a thin smile. "On the contrary, it is of great consequence. For until you are frank with me, I cannot promise your safety." At this, Arkwright buried his face in his hands, his whole frame trembling. "Very well," he whispered hoarsely. "There is more to tell, more than I dared admit. But if I speak, I place myself in mortal peril." Holmes leaned forward, his voice low but urgent. "Then speak, sir, for silence will not save you." And every hour brings the faceless gentleman closer to his design. Arkwright raised his eyes, haunted and desperate, and the confession that followed marked the first crack in the mask of secrecy surrounding this most singular affair. Arkwright's voice trembled as he forced the words past his lips. "You must understand, gentlemen, that I have been bound by a vow, one I swore years ago in the folly of youth. It was meant as nothing more than an initiation jest, a ritual in a secret club of sorts, but it has clung to me like a curse ever since. If I speak of it, I break that vow. Yet if I remain silent, I am undone." Holmes regarded him with that piercing calm which seemed to strip a man of all concealments. "A vow, then?" "I suspected as much." "Pray proceed, for broken oaths are preferable to broken necks, and your faceless acquaintance strikes me as a man who aims at the latter." Arkwright shuddered. "It was 15 years ago when I was in Paris. A society of men, wealthy, ambitious, delighting in secrecy, extended their fellowship to me. They called themselves l'Ordre du Silence. Their emblem was the circle enclosing the cross, the very seal upon that card. Their rule was simple: absolute secrecy under penalty of disgrace or worse. I thought it harmless theatre, and so I pledged myself. In time I drifted away, returned to England and dismissed the matter as a youthful folly. Yet they did not forget." His hands clenched upon the arm of the chair. "Twice in recent years I was approached by emissaries urging me to resume active ties. I refused. Now it seems they have taken to persecution, sending this masked phantom to torment me. Their methods are cruel, Mr. Holmes, subtle as poison. They would ruin my mind before they strike at my life." I exchanged a glance with Holmes, who sat motionless save for the slight tightening of his lips. "So," he said at last, "we lift the veil. Not a random haunting, but the calculated pressure of a secret society. You were wise to speak, Mr. Arkwright, for silence has already marked you. The emblem, the vow, the persecution, all fit together. This so-called faceless gentleman is their chosen instrument." Arkwright buried his face in his hands. "What can I do? If they mean to destroy me, what defense is left?" Holmes's eyes glowed with an inner fire. "You may trust to reason, sir, and to the fact that no human conspiracy, however dark, is immune to light. Their disguise relies on fear. Ours will be truth, but I must have every detail. Describe the society to me, their customs, their members, their haunts in Paris." For an hour Arkwright spoke in halting tones, painting a picture of opulent salons and dimly lit chambers, of men who gathered under oaths and symbols, whispering of influence and power. Many details were vague, but certain names emerged, men of prominence whose presence lent weight to the tale. I could see Holmes's keen mind seizing upon each crumb, storing it away with silent precision. When at last Arkwright had exhausted his knowledge, Holmes rose abruptly. "You have done well, sir. For the present, remain in your chambers and answer no summons, however urgent. I shall make my own inquiries. Watson, come." Once in the street, I could contain myself no longer. "Holmes, do you truly credit this story? It smacks of melodrama. Theatrical oaths, faceless phantoms, secret orders. Yet every melodrama, my dear Watson, is but the exaggeration of some truth. Consider, a society devoted to secrecy must devise striking means to enforce its will. What better than a faceless emissary, who embodies silence itself? No, I do not dismiss it. Rather, I see the outline of a design whose threads stretch from Paris to London." We hailed a cab and rattled toward the Strand once more, the day bright but still veiled with lingering mist. Holmes's eyes never ceased their restless movement, noting signs and faces, as though the whole city were a puzzle spread for his inspection. At length he directed the driver to Pall Mall, where we entered the chambers of an old acquaintance of his, a retired diplomat of encyclopedic knowledge. Here Holmes made discreet inquiries concerning l'Ordre du Silence, couching them in general terms. The diplomat frowned, recalled faint rumors of such a group. Aristocrats dabbling in ritual, merchants seeking influence, whispers of vanished men. Nothing certain, yet enough to confirm that Arkwright's confession was no invention. As we emerged once more into the busy thoroughfare, Holmes's step was brisk, his expression alight with calculation. We advance, Watson. The existence of the society is attested. Their emblem matches. Now we must ask, why Arkwright? What danger lies in his defection that justifies this elaborate persecution? Perhaps he knows something, some secret they fear he may reveal, I suggested. Holmes smiled faintly. Excellent, Watson. That is precisely the question. Until we uncover what knowledge he possesses, we cannot fathom their motive, but we can at least test their vigilance. Tonight I propose a little masquerade of our own. His eyes gleamed with that peculiar light, which always heralded adventure. I shall take Arkwright's place in Bloomsbury. If our blank-faced friend calls again, he may find himself entertained by a host he did not expect. That evening, under cover of darkness, we returned to Arkwright's chambers. The man himself had been persuaded to absent the premises and take lodging elsewhere for the night. Holmes arrayed himself in his clothes, adopting his posture and manner with that uncanny mimicry he so excelled in. I was posted at a side window, revolver ready, while Holmes seated himself at the desk beneath the lamp. Apparently immersed in papers, hours crept by, the silence broken only by the distant clatter of wheels on Bloomsbury's cobbles and the occasional bark of a dog. Midnight approached. My eyelids grew heavy, yet I forced them open. Then, without sound, a shape materialized across the street. There he stood once more, the faceless gentleman, motionless beneath the lamp, his cloak stirring faintly in the night breeze. My pulse quickened. Holmes did not stir, but I knew he was keenly aware of the apparition. Minute after minute passed, the figure unmoving, a dreadful sentinel. Then, with a slow and deliberate step, he began to cross the street. I tightened my grip on the revolver, but Holmes raised one hand slightly, signaling restraint. The figure approached the very window where Holmes sat, so close that I could see the glimmer of light sliding across the dreadful blank mask. He lifted his hand, and upon the sill he placed a card, identical to the first, blank save for the circle and cross impressed upon its surface. At that instant, Holmes sprang from his chair, flung wide the window, and seized the man by the wrist. A struggle ensued, silent, desperate, the two figures locked in shadow. I rushed forward to assist, but the faceless gentleman wrenched free with astonishing strength, striking Holmes across the chest and vaulting backward into the fog. We hurled ourselves into the street, but already he was gone, swallowed by the mist like a phantom returning to its lair. Holmes, breathing hard, clutched in his hand a fragment torn from the man's glove. He examined it by the street lamp, his eyes glittering with triumph. "Watson," he said softly, "our phantom bleeds. The thread we need lies here." And indeed, upon the torn leather clung a smear of dark red, fresh and undeniable. The faceless gentleman, for all his disguise, was flesh and blood after all. Holmes' fingers closed tightly about the fragment, his gaze fixed on it, with an intensity that seemed to block out even the drifting fog and the empty street. "Blood, Watson," he murmured, "the most eloquent witness of all. It tells us two things at once. First, that our adversary is no phantom, but a man of flesh and sinew. Second, that in struggling with me he sustained an injury, likely to the hand or wrist. Somewhere in London tonight, there is a gentleman, well-dressed and of foreign manufacture in his boots, concealing a fresh wound. That, my dear fellow, is a mark as distinctive as any name upon a ledger." He folded the torn glove carefully into his pocketbook, his eyes narrowing as though already tracing invisible lines through the labyrinth of London's underworld. "This gives us our lead, Watson. Blood, cloth, caoutchouc, and chalk, each fragment meaningless alone, yet together forming the outline of a very tangible man." We returned to Baker Street with the dawn already greying the rooftops. Holmes forbade me to speak until he had set the glove under his powerful lens. He worked with needle and reagent, dabbing gently at the smear of blood, then holding the fibers of leather against the light. "Italian manufacture," he muttered, "of the type sold in the finer shops of Bond Street, though imported. Note the cut, Watson. The glove is tailored for long, slender fingers. Our man is of refinement, perhaps even of aristocratic bearing. and the blood dark but not yet congealed when I seized it. The wound was fresh, inflicted within minutes. He will carry it still. I could not restrain my impatience. But how shall we find him in a city of millions? Holmes smiled faintly. By following the trail of his wound, Watson. A gentleman of that class cannot present himself at an apothecary without notice. There are but a handful of establishments discreet enough to serve such a customer at so late an hour. We shall call upon them this morning. After a hasty breakfast, Holmes and I set out upon this errand. At 3 such chemists our inquiries bore no fruit, but at the 4th, a narrow shop off Piccadilly, the proprietor recalled that a man, cloaked and gloved, had called at dawn, requesting dressing for a cut upon his hand. The customer had spoken little, paid in sovereigns, and departed swiftly. He kept his face obscured, the chemist told us, yet I glimpsed enough to see he was clean-shaven, with the pallor of one who had passed a sleepless night. His accent was foreign, French or Italian perhaps. Holmes's eyes gleamed. "Excellent, sir. And did you observe aught else?" "Only this, that he favoured his left hand and held his right within his cloak." We left the shop, Holmes's stride brisk with suppressed excitement. "The net tightens, Watson. He bleeds, he conceals his face, he cloaks his voice, yet each precaution betrays him more than it shields. Soon we shall know not only the mask, but the man behind it." As we walked, I pressed Holmes for his thoughts. "You are convinced this is no mere agent, but a man of standing within the society?" "Undoubtedly. Consider the cost of such disguises, the precision of his movements, the boldness of his visits. This is not a hireling, but one with personal stake. I begin to suspect that Mr. Arkwright's importance to this order is greater than he himself realizes. There is some knowledge he possesses, perhaps unwittingly, which they cannot permit to be loosed." We returned in the afternoon to report to Arkwright, who received us with haggard eagerness. Holmes, however, offered him little comfort. "Your faceless persecutor is wounded, sir, but not yet unmasked. I must insist once again that you be entirely frank with me. Think carefully. What secret of theirs might you hold, whether by chance or intention?" Arkwright shook his head vehemently. "I know nothing. I was privy only to their oaths and their symbol. I swear it." Holmes regarded him coldly. "So you persist in saying? Yet I tell you, your silence places you in greater peril than any confession." He rose abruptly, signaling me to follow. Outside in the street, he muttered, "The man conceals more than fear. Did you note how his hand shook when I pressed him? There is a memory he dare not touch. Until I bring it forth, the society will always hold the advantage." That evening, Holmes set about one of his characteristic maneuvers. He donned his threadbare disguise as an old bookseller, complete with stoop and watery eyes, and disappeared into the fog with scarcely a word of explanation. I saw him again only past midnight, when he returned with soot upon his hands and a gleam of triumph in his gaze. "I have traced him, Watson," he said, throwing himself into the chair by the fire. "Our faceless gentleman lodges in a respectable hotel near Covent Garden, under an assumed name. He arrived but a week past from Paris, and keeps to his rooms by day. The staff remark upon his reticence and the gloves he always wears. Tonight, when he returned, his right hand was bound in linen." "There can be no mistake." I started in amazement. "Then you mean to arrest him at once?" Holmes shook his head. "Patience, Watson. To seize him now would be folly. We must first understand his design, else we grasp the hilt without the blade. I propose instead to draw him out, to compel him to act openly. Only then shall we lay bare the true motive of this persecution." His eyes glittered with a cold fire as he added, "Tomorrow I shall bait the trap. And if our adversary is half as cunning as I believe, he will not resist the lure." I slept little that night, haunted by visions of the blank mask gleaming in the fog. Yet through my unease I felt the stirrings of anticipation, for I knew Holmes was moving steadily toward the heart of the mystery. Whatever secret lay hidden behind Arkwright's protestations, whatever purpose drove the faceless gentleman through London streets, the moment of revelation was drawing near. Holmes had scented his quarry, and like the hound upon the trail, he would not cease until the prey lay exposed. The following evening, a dense fog had once again descended upon London, blanketing the streets with that peculiar, muffling hush which suited the most secretive of maneuvers. Holmes, true to his word, had already prepared for the night's enterprise. his long, lean figure barely visible beneath a cloak drawn tightly about him. I followed at a discreet distance, aware that the success of his plan depended upon patience and stealth rather than brute force. We arrived near Covent Garden, the gas lamps dimmed and flickering through the mist, casting an eerie pall upon the cobbles. Holmes motioned me to a side street and pointed toward a modest hotel, its windows shuttered but for a single dim light on the second floor. "There," he whispered, "our faceless gentleman resides under an assumed name. We shall observe and wait, but not approach prematurely. He will act in his own interest, and that is when our advantage lies." Time passed slowly, the fog swallowing the sound of carriage wheels and the distant murmur of voices. Holmes, unmoving, watched the hotel window through a spyglass, his breath misting in the chill night air. I grew restless but dared not disturb his concentration. At last a faint movement drew his attention, a shadow flitting past the window, deliberate and precise. He touched my arm. "He moves," he said softly. "See how he navigates the light. No ordinary man would risk exposure thus, yet he is confident, because he believes no one observes him." We followed at a distance as he descended the narrow steps of the hotel and slipped into the fog. His cloak and gloves concealed him, but Holmes had already noted the slight bandage on his right hand, confirming the wound we had suspected. He moved swiftly toward the Strand, pausing only once to glance around as though to ensure the streets were empty. Holmes's eyes gleamed. He had anticipated such caution. Our adversary halted at a small alley, narrow and nearly hidden between shuttered shops. Holmes crouched, whispering to me, "This alley is the stage. Notice how he positions himself near the wall, favoring the left side. He is prepared to vanish at a moment's notice, yet he cannot entirely erase the marks of his passage." I leaned forward, peering through the fog, and saw the glimmer of something pale beneath his cloak. Holmes gestured, and we approached silently, careful not to alarm him. Just as we reached the mouth of the alley, a sudden gust of wind caused the shadowy figure to spin, and in that instant, a fragment of the pale mask came loose, fluttering to the ground. Holmes seized it immediately. "Good," he whispered. "A clue, Watson. Every mask has a weakness, and this one has yielded to the wind." We followed the figure further into the maze of streets, noting the marks left by his polished boots and the faint smear of chalk upon the cobbles. Holmes examined each with meticulous care, pausing now and again to comment in his low, precise voice. "Observe, Watson, the pattern of his gait. Each step deliberate, almost ritualistic. He is more than a mere agent. He is a man trained, disciplined, accustomed to secrecy and careful timing. And yet, even he leaves traces that reveal his passage." Finally, the figure entered a narrow courtyard hidden from the main thoroughfare, the high walls enclosing it like a fortress. Holmes and I approached the entrance cautiously, peering around the corner. Our adversary had paused, his figure tense, and I saw him remove the gloves with which he had concealed his hands. A bandage, damp with blood, was visible beneath the linen. He was tending to his wound with care, dabbing at it with a small cloth. Holmes turned to me with a satisfied gleam. "He cannot conceal everything, Watson. Observe how his wound dictates his movements. He must pause, he must attend to it, and in doing so he becomes vulnerable. The trap is set. Now we need only to manipulate him into revealing his true intentions." We lingered, hidden in the shadows, while he completed his ministrations and readjusted his cloak. Then he retrieved a small envelope from his pocket, similar in size and thickness to the cards left for Arkwright. With deliberate care, he placed it upon the ledge of a window opposite and withdrew swiftly into the courtyard. Holmes's eyes narrowed. "Watson, note the subtlety. The envelope is intended to convey a message without personal interaction. He fears detection, yet he must communicate. This reveals his dual constraints. He acts for the society, yet he cannot risk direct exposure." We waited until he vanished once more into the night before approaching the envelope. It was sealed with the same emblem, the circle enclosing the cross. Holmes broke it open carefully, revealing a single line of text written in an elegant foreign hand. "The vow is not forgotten. Compliance ensures safety." Holmes' lips curved in a thin smile. "No ordinary threat, Watson. This is the language of power disguised as menace. Our faceless gentleman is a messenger, an enforcer. And yet even enforcers have weaknesses. He is wounded. He must act in certain predictable ways, and he relies upon the fear he inspires more than upon direct confrontation. We shall exploit this. Returning to Baker Street, Holmes spread out all the fragments of mask, glove, and the envelope upon the table. He examined them with methodical attention, connecting threads invisible to any but his keen intellect. Watson, the pattern is emerging. He is Parisian, skilled in disguise, trained to terrify, yet constrained by injury and predictable habits. Arkwright's tormentor is no spectre. He is a man entirely subject to cause and effect. Every step he takes leaves a chain we may follow to its source. I leaned over the fragments, feeling a mix of awe and apprehension. But Holmes, what then is the ultimate purpose? To frighten Arkwright, surely, but to what end? Holmes's gaze met mine, piercing and intense. The Society seeks information, Watson. Something Arkwright possesses, remembered or witnessed, which they cannot afford to lose. Their fearsome methods are designed to coerce, to manipulate, and perhaps to terrorize into compliance. Our task is to illuminate the shadows, to make the invisible visible. And mark my words, the true motive lies not in the mask itself, but in what it conceals, the man behind it, and the knowledge he is sworn to protect. He paused, tapping a fragment of the pale mask thoughtfully. The night is still young, Watson, and we have much yet to uncover. Tomorrow we shall escalate our observation, place the Society's agent in a position where he must reveal not only his identity, but the purpose of his campaign. The game proceeds, and we are closer than ever to the heart of this dark puzzle. I could only nod, sensing the inexorable pull of events. The faceless gentleman was no phantom. He was a man acting under compulsion, constrained by injury and secrecy, yet supremely confident in his disguise. Holmes had traced him through the fog and darkness, and in so doing had prepared the next step, a maneuver of cunning and precision that would, I sensed, finally expose the truth behind the mask. The anticipation was electric, and I knew that the following night would bring revelations that could not be postponed. The following evening brought with it a wind-driven fog, clinging low to the streets and muffling even the distant tolling of church bells. Holmes and I had stationed ourselves near Covent Garden once more, our presence hidden by shadows, the cobblestones slick beneath our careful steps. He had spent the day plotting, examining each fragment, and reassembling the movements of the faceless gentleman with meticulous attention, and I could see in his expression the quiet excitement of one closing in on the truth. "We must observe, Watson, yet not intrude prematurely," he whispered as we crouched behind the thick corner of a shop. "Our adversary is a creature of habit, restrained by both caution and injury. He will act, and when he does, he will reveal more than he suspects." Hours passed slowly. The streetlights flickered through the mist, illuminating passing figures whose outlines were distorted by the thick air. I grew restless, glancing anxiously toward the hotel where our phantom lodged. Holmes, however, remained motionless, his eyes fixed upon a dimly lit window, as though the glow itself contained some secret message. At length, movement stirred within the hotel. A shadow detached itself from the upper floor and slipped silently down the steps into the courtyard. The man moved with deliberate precision, favoring his left hand and concealing the bandaged right beneath his cloak. Holmes' gaze sharpened, his hand tapping softly against the hilt of his cane. "Observe, Watson," he murmured. He proceeds to the alley. "Notice the caution in each step. He believes himself unobserved, yet he leaves traces even so." We followed at a discreet distance, the fog swallowing our progress as the figure disappeared into the narrow alleyways. Holmes bent to examine the faint impressions of the polished boots, noting each subtle detail. "Continental manufacture," he muttered. "Parisian, of course. The man is refined, cautious, yet constrained. His injury dictates his actions as much as his fear dictates his caution." Suddenly he paused. "Here," he said, pointing to a faint smear upon the stones. I leaned closer, heart quickening. It was blood, dark and unmistakable. "The wound is fresh, Watson. He cannot have covered the hand entirely, and the injury betrays him. He is vulnerable." We continued, tracing him through a series of twisting alleys until he paused at the doorway of a building almost hidden from the main thoroughfare. Holmes gestured toward the entrance. "A trap, Watson, perfectly chosen. He seeks privacy, yet he cannot resist leaving clues. And tonight we shall compel him to action." We waited, concealed in the shadows, while he entered the building. Holmes's eyes glittered as he consulted a small notebook, reviewing the movements we had observed over the past days. "His patterns repeat," he murmured. "Every night he communicates, always leaving the envelope in a predetermined spot. The message is predictable, and the place is exposed. Our opportunity lies in substituting the expected object with one of our own making." Minutes later, the envelope appeared, lying upon the ledge of the window, just as Holmes had anticipated. He signaled me, and together we approached silently. I could see the tension in his posture, the coiled energy that preceded action. With deliberate care, he swapped the envelope with one of our own, inscribed with a subtle instruction, "Meet at dawn alone." To resolve the matter peacefully, Holmes retreated, motioning me to the shadows while our phantom returned, his approach cautious but confident. He lifted the envelope and withdrew it to read. I could see the slight hesitation in his movements, the subtle tightening of the fingers upon the bandaged hand. Then, with the slightest exhalation, he turned and began moving toward the direction indicated by our substitution. Holmes followed silently, and I behind him, marveled at the precision with which he orchestrated each movement. Our adversary, so careful and cunning, had walked into a carefully prepared stage, yet he suspected nothing. Even the fog could not conceal him from Holmes's keen observation. As we neared the appointed location, Holmes whispered, "Notice, Watson, the caution in every step. Each action is dictated by fear and training. The moment we intercept him, we shall compel the man to reveal the truth behind the mask. Observe carefully. There will be no room for miscalculation." The alley opened into a small courtyard, enclosed by high walls. Lanterns from neighboring streets cast elongated shadows across the cobbles, and our faceless gentleman paused, glancing anxiously around. Holmes stepped forward, emerging from the shadows. "You have been expected," he said softly but firmly. "The game is not to frighten but to resolve. You are wounded, constrained, yet you persist in a charade that serves only secrecy and fear. The time has come to speak plainly." The figure recoiled slightly, glancing at the bandaged hand and then at the fragments of mask clutched in Holmes's hand. For the first time I saw hesitation, a crack in the confident poise that had marked his every movement. He raised a gloved hand, but Holmes's calm intensity seemed to root him to the spot. "I do not seek confrontation," Holmes continued. "We seek understanding. The society you serve, l'Ordre du Silence, is known to us now. The target of your campaign, Mr. Arkwright, is no mere victim, but a man whose knowledge you seek. Your methods reveal not power, but fear. Speak, and perhaps some measure of safety may be granted." The faceless gentleman shifted, the fog swirling about him like a cloak of uncertainty. Then slowly, deliberately, he removed the mask, revealing a pale but striking face, the right hand still bandaged, eyes wide with both defiance and unease. Holmes' eyes sparkled. "At last," he whispered. "Observe, Watson. The mask falls, yet the game is far from concluded. We now see the man, and in seeing him we approach the revelation of motive. Every question, every threat, every fragment of disguise has led to this moment. The truth lies just beyond, and with careful reasoning we shall draw it forth." The faceless gentleman's voice was low, controlled, yet tinged with urgency. "You know of the society," he said. "You have observed me. But knowledge alone does not protect you. You have stepped into a web whose threads extend far beyond London, and each movement is measured." Holmes inclined his head, expression inscrutable. "I do not fear webs, sir, only shadows. And shadows, as you see, vanish before light. Speak plainly, and we may yet end this without further peril." The man paused, glancing at the bandaged hand, at the mask fragments, at the fog-laden courtyard, and then finally, as if deciding that concealment was now pointless, he began to speak. The words, carefully measured, would unravel the design of the society, reveal the secret that bound Arkwright, and illuminate the dark strategy that had sent him, faceless, through the streets of London. Holmes's eyes never left him, and I felt the quiet thrill of anticipation, knowing that the night's careful surveillance, the fragments of evidence, and our patience were about to yield the long-sought revelation. The game, intricate and deliberate, had reached the pivotal moment, and in the shadows of the fog, the first true truth of the faceless gentleman would emerge. The faceless gentleman's eyes, dark and alert beneath the pallor of his face, darted toward Holmes and then back to the shadowed corners of the courtyard. He seemed to weigh each word, each gesture, as though calculating the precise balance between truth and survival. For a long moment there was silence, broken only by the distant clang of a carriage bell and the faint drip of water from the alley eaves. Finally, he spoke, his voice low but measured. "The Society knows of every transaction, every misstep. Mr. Arkwright holds a ledger, a record of dealings, small perhaps to the untrained eye, but invaluable to them. They believe it contains a detail that compromises their influence in Paris, in London, perhaps across Europe. I was sent to recover it, or at least ensure its disappearance from his possession." Holmes's expression remained inscrutable, though I saw the faintest tightening at the corners of his eyes. "And this ledger, sir," he said slowly, "was it in your hands at any time or merely in your pursuit?" The man hesitated, glancing at the bandaged hand skill, your intelligence, and your foresight. "All these may protect you if applied judiciously. The Society relies upon fear and silence, yet reason, once applied, can undo both." A long pause followed, broken only by the distant tolling of a bell. The man's shoulders slumped slightly, as though a burden had been shifted. "Then," he said at last, "I will speak, but only to those who can understand and act wisely. I will reveal what I can of the ledger, the Society's purpose and the methods they employ. But the cost may be great." Holmes' eyes glimmered with anticipation. "Very well. We shall hear all and act accordingly. But know this, your cooperation will not go unnoticed. Prudence, honesty, and clarity, these are your shields. Fear, deceit, and concealment, these are their weapons. By using reason rather than terror, you may yet preserve both your life and conscience." The man lowered his head as though coming to a solemn resolution. "Then I will begin. Listen carefully, and you will know why the Society moves, why Arkwright was targeted, and what truths must be guarded. The ledger is not merely a collection of names or transactions. It contains knowledge that could alter fortunes, sway influence, and expose connections between men of power across nations. This is why they fear its exposure, and why they sent me in this guise to coerce compliance." Holmes inclined his head slightly, motioning me to listen with utmost attention. "Speak, then. Every detail is significant, every sequence critical. The web is complex, yet with reason. We shall trace each thread to its source. Your confession, carefully considered, is the key to unraveling both the mask and the Society behind it. Begin." And so, in the cold fog of Covent Garden, with the pale mask removed and the bandaged hand exposed, the faceless gentleman began the account that would reveal the hidden design, the true purpose of his nocturnal visits, and the intricate machinations of the secret society that had haunted Mr. Arkwright for so long. Holmes listened unwavering while I recorded each word, knowing that the path to revelation, painstakingly constructed from fragments of mask, glove, and blood, had at last entered the final stage. The faceless gentleman spoke in a low, deliberate tone, each word measured, weighed by the consequences it might carry. "The ledger," he began, "was begun by Arkwright's father, a man of considerable influence in both commerce and diplomacy. It catalogued not only financial transactions, but connections, associations, correspondences, names of those whose dealings were meant to remain hidden. For the Society, such knowledge is currency, and exposure is unacceptable. That is why Mr. Arkwright was chosen, for he inherited the ledger, perhaps unaware of the weight it carries." Holmes listened intently, his eyes narrowing, lips compressed in concentration. "So the ledger is not merely a record, but a map of influence. And the Society," he said softly, "uses fear to protect its secrets. Every card, every masked visit, is designed to intimidate the holder into silence." The man inclined his head. "Precisely. My orders were clear. Do not harm, do not endanger, simply compel the subject to comply. Yet each encounter has grown more precarious. Arkwright's resistance is not merely obstinacy. It is careful thought. He has not yielded, and in my failure to secure the ledger I am questioned. Suspicion grows, and the Society has become impatient." Holmes leaned forward slightly. "Impatience is the weakness of the powerful, as it is of the fearful. And your injury, your wound, does it limit your capacity to act as before?" "Yes," the man admitted. "I am slowed, cautious in my movements. Yet I continue, because fear and obedience are stronger than prudence. Each evening I venture forth to deliver warnings, to maintain pressure. But the effort is taxing. I am aware of my own vulnerability, yet cannot afford to retreat. Holmes's eyes glimmered. Your vulnerability is the key, Watson. Every agent of secrecy must leave a trace. Wounds, hesitations, deviations from routine all betray him. He is constrained not merely by the society, but by the limitations of flesh and circumstance. And in understanding these limits, we gain leverage. The man's gaze flicked toward the remnants of mask and glove on the ground. I see now, he said, that my precautions, my disguises, they are transparent to someone who observes as you do. I had not considered that the smallest fragment, the lightest smear of blood, could betray my path. Yet you have followed, and here we are. Holmes inclined his head, expression impassive. Every fragment is a word in the story, every smear a syllable in the sentence, and you have unwittingly written your narrative. Our task is simply to read it and to act accordingly. Now tell us of your movements, precise times, places, contacts, so that we may reconstruct the full sequence of events. The faceless gentleman took a breath, then began recounting the series of nocturnal visits he had made over the past fortnight. Each detail he offered was precise: the hours of departure from his lodgings, the careful steps along deserted streets, the means by which he ensured that no ordinary observer would detect him, the selection of alleys and shadows, the delivery of envelopes, and the moments of pause to tend his wound. Holmes listened without interruption, his keen eyes darting to the smallest details I might have overlooked, the slight tremor in the man's hand as he recalled certain encounters, the way he described glances over the shoulder, and the repeated avoidance of direct confrontation. And all of this, Holmes said at last, was designed to terrify Arkwright into yielding information he does not yet possess. Yet your own hesitation, your very humanity, has created gaps, weak points. We have exploited those gaps to gain both observation and insight. The ledger remains elusive, yes, but your methods have led us to understand the structure, the intent, and now the location of the society's enforcer, yourself. The man lowered his eyes. For you understand perfectly. I was trained to act without error, yet I am neither machine nor demon. Each night, the fear I intended to instill upon Arkwright has in turn weighed upon me. I find my conscience in conflict with my orders, and that is why I have spoken. Holmes leaned back slightly, clasping his hands together. Conscience and fear, these are potent forces, yet reason is stronger still. You have acted as an agent of coercion, yet you have made errors, and those errors have allowed us to intervene. That is precisely what distinguishes the capable from the invulnerable. And in these errors we find the truth. The society cannot operate without its agents, yet even its agents are subject to the limits of circumstance. I could see that the man was visibly relieved, yet still tense, as if the act of confession had lifted part of the burden, but left the weight of reprisal still pressing upon him. "What would you have me do?" he asked quietly. "I have no authority to end the society's pursuits, and yet I wish to prevent further harm." Holmes's gaze was steady, unwavering. "You will act carefully within reason to ensure that the immediate danger to Arkwright is mitigated. You have revealed to us your methods, your constraints, and the motivations of the society. That knowledge, applied with prudence, can neutralize the immediate threat. And beyond that, we shall intervene strategically to dismantle the mechanism of intimidation, preserving both your safety and the ledger's integrity." The man nodded slowly, as if digesting the weight of Holmes's words. "And the ledger?" he asked. "Its secrets? Will they remain protected?" Holmes allowed a faint smile. "For the present, yes, but our aim is not merely concealment. Our aim is understanding. We must uncover the full scope of the society's design, determine the ledger's significance, and secure it against exploitation. You have brought us close, but the final moves remain to be made. That is where strategy, observation, and precision come into play." The faceless gentleman exhaled sharply, a tension leaving his shoulders that I had not noticed before. "Then I will continue my cooperation," he said. "Within the limits of safety, I shall act to prevent further harm, and I will disclose whatever I know of their operations." Holmes inclined his head. "Excellent. And remember, each fragment, each mark, each detail you reveal is a thread we shall use to unravel the whole. Fear is transient, but reason endures. Now you must rest. We shall plan the next steps carefully, ensuring that both the ledger and the agent are preserved. and that the Society's reach is limited by intelligence and foresight rather than by confrontation alone. As we led him away from the courtyard, the fog seemed to thin, almost as though the clarity of truth itself was beginning to push back the darkness. Holmes, walking beside me, murmured softly, almost to himself, "The game is no longer merely observation, Watson. It has entered its final stage. The pieces are set, the players known, and the next encounter shall force the Society to act openly. Then we shall see not only the man behind the mask, but the full design he serves," I sensed, with that peculiar thrill that accompanies our adventures, that the culmination of careful reasoning, patient observation, and methodical deduction was at hand. The faceless gentleman, though still constrained and wary, had revealed enough to make the next step possible. Holmes's mind, already working with relentless precision, would leave no thread unexamined, no shadow unlit, as we approached the revelation that would finally expose the Society's purpose and its chosen agent's true identity. The fog-laden streets of London, so long the theatre of mystery, seemed to wait with us, holding their breath for what was to come. Holmes spent the remainder of the night poring over the notes, fragments, and recollections the faceless gentleman had provided. Each detail, no matter how minor, was carefully catalogued and cross-referenced. I watched in quiet admiration as he reconstructed the nocturnal movements, the pattern of envelopes, and the calculated avoidance of the streets by our mysterious agent. To any ordinary observer, the sequence would have seemed chaotic, a string of chance events and minor accidents. But Holmes saw the meticulous order beneath the surface, the invisible logic governing each step. Morning arrived with a pallid sun struggling through heavy clouds. Holmes's eyes were bright with anticipation as he outlined a plan. "Watson, the Society relies upon predictability within fear. Their agent moves according to instructions and ritual. Yet he is injured, uncertain, and constrained. These are advantages we shall exploit." We returned to Covent Garden by late afternoon. The faceless gentleman, whose name we had yet to learn, accompanied us under the cover of disguise, his bandaged hand still visible beneath the sleeve. Holmes's plan was both simple and audacious. They would present the ledger, or what would appear to be the ledger, at a neutral location, forcing the agent to act openly. As dusk fell, the streets became shrouded once more in mist. Holmes directed us to a narrow side street, just off the main thoroughfare, where the shadows pooled thickly around a quiet warehouse. "Observe carefully, Watson," he whispered. "He will arrive expecting an ambush, yet he will find only reason. The Society's agent cannot resist taking action, and in doing so he will reveal both intent and identity." Minutes passed. Then from the fog a figure emerged, gloved and cloaked, cautious but determined. The faceless gentleman froze momentarily, scanning the surroundings with the precision of a predator. Holmes and I remained concealed, waiting for the moment of revelation. The agent approached the designated spot, his eyes scanning every shadow, every doorway. Then carefully he withdrew an envelope from his cloak, his habitual communication, and paused, examining the ledge where we had placed the decoy. Holmes leaned closer, whispering, "Notice his hesitation, Watson. He recognizes the discrepancy, yet he proceeds. He is compelled by both duty and fear." The man removed his gloves with deliberate care, exposing the bandaged right hand. I noted the tremor, slight but unmistakable, as he read the contents of the envelope. Holmes's eyes sparkled. "He cannot resist verifying the message," he murmured. "Every agent of secrecy checks, confirms, and adjusts. That is the moment we exploit." Our agent approached, moving with careful precision, and picked up the decoy ledger. At that instant, Holmes stepped from the shadows, his presence commanding yet calm. "You have done well to follow your orders, sir," he said quietly. "Yet now we require truth, not obedience." The faceless gentleman froze, his eyes wide beneath the pale mask, and then slowly removed it, revealing a face lined with tension but refined, commanding yet burdened by conscience. "I am Jean Moreau," he admitted, the first time he had spoken his name aloud. "I am tasked to secure the ledger. I act under orders from l'Ordre du Silence, yet I doubt the wisdom of their methods." Holmes inclined his head, voice steady. "You have acted under compulsion, yet your hesitations have betrayed truth. This is fortunate for us, and necessary for reason to prevail. Tell us, Moreau, what is your knowledge of the ledger, its contents, and the Society's objectives?" Moreau exhaled and gestured toward the decoy ledger. "This," he said, is not the real ledger. The true ledger remains in Arkwright's possession. My role is to ensure it is surrendered, or, failing that the society is kept informed of every step he takes. They fear exposure, particularly of connections among influential men in London and Paris, and I was sent to apply pressure without direct confrontation. Each visit, each envelope was calculated to frighten, yet not to harm. Holmes's eyes narrowed, studying him with intense scrutiny. So you are an instrument of intimidation, constrained by both duty and physical limitation, and yet by revealing your identity and recounting your movements, you have granted us leverage. The society relies upon fear, but you have shown that reason and foresight can unmask even the most disciplined agent. Moreau nodded reluctantly, the tension in his posture easing slightly. Yes, I see that now. My orders were absolute, yet the constraints of injury, discretion, and human error have allowed you to intervene. I am relieved yet wary. The society is vast. Their reach is formidable. Any misstep could imperil not only me but Arkwright as well. Holmes stepped closer, voice firm but measured. No step is free from consequence, yet prudence and clarity protect more than concealment. You will act to prevent further harm within reason, while we manage the strategic oversight necessary to ensure the ledger's safety. Together we may neutralize the threat and reveal the society's methods. I watched as Moreau lowered his head, considering the words. There was a long pause, broken only by the soft sound of the fog shifting across the street. And Arkwright? He asked at last. How is his safety ensured? Holmes' voice was quiet, precise. By observation, by anticipation, and by patience, every move you make, every decision we guide contributes to his protection. Fear alone cannot protect. Only reason, applied carefully, will ensure safety. We shall allow the society's agent to act, but only under conditions we control. The ledger remains intact, and the truth will emerge without unnecessary peril. Moreau exhaled, a mixture of relief and lingering anxiety on his face. Then I shall cooperate within the limits of safety, he said. I will disclose what I know of the society, their methods and their design, yet I must remain cautious. Exposure is dangerous. Holmes inclined his head slightly. Excellent. Prudence is the greatest ally of those who serve truth. Your cooperation, when tempered with care, allows us to understand and dismantle the mechanism of intimidation. Fear is transient, but knowledge endures. And tonight, Watson, we have positioned every piece for the final revelation. As Moreau stepped back, the fog seemed to shift around us, the outlines of the warehouse and alley softening in the dim light. Holmes's eyes gleamed with anticipation, the culmination of patient observation, careful reasoning and methodical deduction at hand. The society's agent had revealed himself. The ledger remained secure, and the intricate web of fear and secrecy was beginning to unravel. I could feel the tension lift slightly, yet knew that the final confrontation, the exposure of the society's purpose, the unmasking of their methods, and the securement of the ledger was imminent. Holmes's mind, ever precise and relentless, had brought us to this pivotal juncture, and the resolution, long foreseen in the careful accumulation of evidence, was only a matter of timing. The streets of London, still shrouded in fog, waited silently, as if holding their breath for the truth to emerge. Night had fully descended upon London, the fog thick and unyielding, blanketing the streets in its spectral embrace. Holmes, Moreau, and I moved with careful precision through the alleys near Covent Garden, each step measured, each shadow evaluated. Holmes had mapped the path meticulously, anticipating the society's next maneuver, predicting the exact moment when action would become unavoidable. The time for observation had passed. The time for decisive intervention had arrived. Moreau walked slightly ahead, his bandaged hand tucked beneath his cloak, eyes darting with cautious calculation. He was a man torn between obedience and conscience, yet he moved with the discipline of one trained for clandestine operations. Holmes followed closely, fingers lightly brushing the fragments of mask and glove that had been collected, evidence of past movements and indicators of habit. I, as ever, remained a step behind, recording, observing, absorbing each detail that might illuminate the unfolding drama. We arrived at a narrow courtyard, enclosed by high walls barely visible from the main street. Holmes motioned for us to halt. "Patience, Watson," he whispered. "The society's agent will act. compelled by orders and by habit. We must observe without interference until the moment he can reveal his true intent. Any premature action may disrupt the sequence and obscure the truth. Minutes passed. Then, as if summoned by some invisible cue, figures emerged from the mist, shadows taking form, moving with deliberate caution. Moreau stiffened, scanning the perimeter. Holmes observed keenly, noting the weight of each step, the subtle rhythm in their approach. "They are aware," he murmured, "yet they underestimate our vigilance. Observe, Watson. The Society's reach is formidable but not omnipotent. Their confidence rests upon fear. We exploit reason." Two men approached Moreau, their faces partially concealed beneath hoods, movements deliberate, measured. The tension was palpable, a taut wire stretched across the fog-laden courtyard. Holmes's gaze flicked to the shadows, calculating, predicting, preparing. They seek confirmation and exchange, perhaps intimidation. Yet they walk into observation, and in doing so their purpose is revealed. One of the men spoke, voice low and controlled. "You have delayed too long, Moreau. The ledger must be secured, or consequences will follow. We know your hesitations." Moreau's jaw tightened. "I follow orders," he said evenly. "Yet I also act with reason. There is danger in blind obedience, and consequences in every misstep. I deliver what is necessary, nothing more." Holmes stepped forward, his voice cutting through the fog with calm authority. "Gentlemen, it seems you are unaware that observation has already preceded your movements. You are surrounded not by shadows, but by reason. Every action you take is recorded, every deviation noted. I suggest you speak plainly, for concealment now serves no purpose." The two men froze, eyes wide beneath the hoods, scanning the fog as though seeking invisible allies. Moreau, for the first time, seemed to relax slightly. "I have warned them," he said quietly. "The Society must be exposed for its methods, yet I remain constrained by orders and by injury. I cannot act beyond these limits." Holmes nodded. "Then we shall act in concert. You have revealed enough of the Society's intent, and your presence here ensures their methods are laid bare. But action must be calculated, precise, and without unnecessary risk. The ledger remains secure, and the Society's reach can be curtailed if we proceed logically." The men exchanged glances, tension evident in their posture. Then, as if acknowledging some unspoken hierarchy, they stepped back slightly. Holmes continued, his voice steady, persuasive, unwavering. "Fear has driven your Society's movements, yet reason now guides ours. The ledger is in Arkwright's possession. Any attempt to secure it by force or intimidation will be observed, recorded, and counted. Your options are limited: compliance, disclosure, or exposure. Choose wisely." The larger of the two men, hood partially falling back, revealed a pale, determined face. "You understand our purpose," he said. "Yet the Society's interests are vast, spanning nations. Exposure is not merely local, but international. You cannot contain its reach with reason alone." Holmes's eyes gleamed. "Containment is not required. Observation, anticipation, and strategic intervention suffice. The Society may extend across borders, but each agent is human, constrained by orders, fear, and circumstance. It is their humanity, not their influence, that we exploit. Each hesitation, each error, each fragment of evidence is a thread leading to clarity. Reason is stronger than fear when applied with precision." The fog swirled between us, cold and heavy, yet the tension began to shift. Moreau's shoulders relaxed slightly, and even the two Society men exhibited subtle signs of uncertainty. Holmes advanced a step, gloved hand resting lightly on the fragments of mask he had carried from previous encounters. "Observe, gentlemen. The Faceless is now revealed. His methods, constraints, and motives are understood. The ledger remains intact, and its secrets will remain so if you act within reason. Continue in blind obedience, and the consequences are unavoidable. Choose clarity over fear." A long pause followed, broken only by the soft drip of water from a nearby gutter. Then the men slowly withdrew into the fog, their steps careful, deliberate, yet now hesitant, calculated not by orders alone, but by the realization that reason, observation, and logic had revealed them. Moreau lowered his head, exhaling with relief while Holmes studied the retreating figures with intense focus. "Watson," he said quietly, "observe the significance of what has just occurred. The Society's reach is formidable, but even the most disciplined agent is constrained by circumstance, error, and conscience. By understanding these limitations, we have secured the ledger, neutralized immediate threats and exposed the patterns of intimidation. The game is far from over, yet the primary objective is achieved. I nodded, absorbing the subtle mastery of Holmes's reasoning. Every shadow, every hesitation, every fragment of mask and glove had been accounted for, leveraged and transformed into strategic advantage. The ledger was safe. Moreau was no longer compelled entirely by fear, and the Society's agents had been forced into retreat by reason alone. Holmes's gaze swept the courtyard, lingering on the fog-laden street. The faceless gentleman has revealed not only his own constraints, but the methodology of the Society itself. Our intervention has shifted the balance. Fear has been countered by foresight, secrecy countered by observation, and chaos constrained by logic. London, for the moment, is free of immediate peril, yet vigilance remains essential. Knowledge once illuminated must be protected. Moreau inclined his head, still cautious but composed. I understand, Mr. Holmes. I will continue to act within the bounds of safety, revealing what I can without further exposure. The Society may still pursue its aims, yet for now reason guides our actions and the ledger remains secure. Holmes nodded, a rare expression of satisfaction softening his features. Well done, Watson. The pieces are set, the immediate danger neutralized, and the path to full resolution lies before us. Our next steps will ensure the ledger's protection. The Society's methods are understood, and Arkwright's safety guaranteed. The game is concluding, and reason has prevailed over fear. The fog shifted, curling around the courtyard like a final, silent witness. Holmes turned toward Moreau, expression keen and commanding. Prepare yourself, my friend. You have acted with both skill and conscience. The Society is aware yet constrained. The ledger is secure, yet its significance remains to be fully realized. The next moves will require precision, courage, and intellect. But for now the shadow has been lifted, and the truth begins to emerge. As we departed the courtyard, the fog lingering in the narrow alleys, I sensed the quiet triumph of reason over fear. The faceless gentleman, once a creature of mystery and menace, had become an ally through revelation and conscience. Holmes, ever vigilant, had orchestrated each move with meticulous care, transforming fragments of evidence into a decisive strategy. The streets of London, shrouded yet no longer silent, awaited the final unraveling of the Society's design, a conclusion that promised both revelation and justice. The following morning dawned pale and chill, the fog of London lifting to reveal the streets slick with moisture, glistening in the weak sunlight. Holmes, Moreau, and I walked toward Arkwright's residence, each step purposeful yet measured. The events of the previous night had shifted the balance. The Society's agents had been exposed, the ledger remained intact, and Moreau, once a faceless instrument of fear, had aligned his conscience with reason. Holmes's gaze swept the streets with his usual intensity, taking note of every detail, the faint tracks of passing footsteps, the alignment of shutters, the angle of lamplight upon damp cobbles. "Observe, Watson," he said, voice low. "The city itself is a record of movement, hesitation, and intention. Even the absence of action tells a story. Last night's confrontation has forced the Society into retreat. Now we must complete the analysis, reveal the true design, and secure the ledger permanently." We arrived at Arkwright's house, a modest yet respectable townhouse in Bloomsbury. Holmes led the way with Moreau close behind, and I followed, absorbing each subtle cue that the detective did not allow to escape his notice. Inside, Arkwright himself waited, anxious yet resolute, having been informed in careful terms of the precautions and observations that had protected him. Holmes laid out the sequence with precise clarity. The Society's method is consistent: intimidation through masked agents, messages designed to instill fear, and reliance upon the assumption that secrecy protects them. Moreau, once their instrument, has now revealed the structural weaknesses, the timing of visits, the limitations imposed by injury, and the predictable rituals that guided his actions. Each fragment of mask, each smear of blood, each hesitation in the fog has been accounted for. Observation and reason have triumphed over fear. Moreau stepped forward, bandaged hand now unthreatening, his countenance composed. "I have disclosed what I know. The ledger is safe, and the Society's methods have been revealed. They will adapt, undoubtedly, yet their power relies upon secrecy, and secrecy has been compromised. I am no longer their blind instrument. My conscience guides my actions. Arkwright, still wary but grateful, inquired cautiously, and the ledger itself? Its contents. Holmes's expression softened slightly, though his eyes remained sharp. It is a map of influence, as Moreau described. Names, connections, transactions, all sensitive, all potentially destabilizing if misused. But knowledge in the hands of reason is protection. By securing the ledger and exposing the society's tactics, we ensure that information cannot be used for coercion or malice. The balance of power shifts from fear to foresight. I observed Moreau closely. He had been an enigma, a creature of shadows and orders. Yet the clarity of his confession and his willingness to cooperate had transformed him from a faceless threat into an agent of resolution. Holmes's reasoning had allowed him to navigate the treacherous path between duty and conscience, exposing both the society and the vulnerabilities that had driven its operations. Holmes continued, his voice firm, measured, and commanding. The society will not attempt immediate reprisals, not with their methods exposed and their agents compromised. Any further action will be cautious, constrained, and predictable, exactly as we anticipated. Our role now is to preserve the ledger, document the sequence, and ensure that Arkwright, Moreau, and the truth are protected. Reason, applied precisely, has undone the machinery of fear. Arkwright breathed a deep sigh of relief. And Moreau? He asked. Holmes inclined his head toward him. He has acted with prudence and conscience. He remains constrained yet autonomous. The mask may fall, but the man behind it has revealed himself through careful reasoning. He will continue to act with vigilance. The ledger, the society, and the city all have been observed, analyzed, and controlled through intellect rather than terror. Moreau lowered his gaze briefly. I am grateful, he murmured. I feared exposure would bring danger, yet I see now that reason and foresight protect more than concealment ever could. I shall act with care, but without fear of blindness imposed by orders alone. Holmes's lips curved into the faintest trace of a smile. The game is concluded, Watson. The Faceless has revealed himself. The society structure has been exposed, and the ledger remains safe. London has, for the moment, been restored to order. Yet, as always, the world contains many mysteries, and each shadow may conceal another puzzle waiting to be unraveled. For now, however, reason reigns supreme. Arkwright offered his hand to Moreau, and the gesture, though cautious, was sincere. Your courage in speaking plainly has preserved both life and conscience, he said. Moreau inclined his head, acknowledging both the gratitude and the wisdom in the words. I acted with what I could, guided by reason at last. The society's methods have been revealed, and perhaps some measure of justice may follow. Holmes turned toward me, his sharp gaze softened by the quiet satisfaction of resolution. Watson, note how every clue, every hesitation, every fragment has led to this moment. The mask has fallen not by force but by understanding. Fear has been countered by logic, secrecy undone by careful observation. This is the triumph of methodical reasoning over chaos, a truth I trust you will record faithfully. I nodded, knowing that this case, with its faceless menace, its secretive society, and its intricate web of deception, would occupy a distinguished place among our adventures. Holmes's reasoning had turned the labyrinth of fear into a path of clarity, and in doing so, preserved both justice and conscience. As we left Arkwright's residence, the sunlight piercing the dissipating fog, Holmes remarked quietly, almost philosophically, "It is not always the sharpest blade that secures victory, Watson, but the keenest mind. In fear, men see only shadows. In reason, they see truth. And tonight, the Faceless has been unmasked. The society's methods revealed, and the ledger remains secure, not by strength, but by intellect. We walked through the streets, the fog now retreating to reveal the familiar outlines of London, confident in the quiet knowledge that reason and careful observation had preserved order. Moreau, once a shadowed instrument of fear, had emerged as a man reconciled with conscience and action, while Arkwright's legacy remained protected. Holmes, as ever, moved with the calm assurance of one who knows that every mystery has a solution, if only observed with patience, logic, and unwavering insight. And so the city resumed its rhythm, unaware of the intricacies that had unfolded in its hidden corners, yet safer for the triumph of reason over fear, and for the revelation of the faceless gentleman who had, at last, stepped from the shadows into the light of truth.